We're joined now here in the studio by Conservative MP Chris Philp. Welcome to the Daily Politics. Welsh First Minister Carwyn Jones has said the deal kills the idea of fair funding, while Nicola Sturgeon has called it grubby and shameless. Are you concerned about the impact that this perceived favouritism is going to have on UK domestic political relations more widely?
No, I'm not concerned. Let's remember that both Scotland and Wales, over the last couple of years, have themselves received a total of £1.3 billion in City Deal funding, very similar to the funding Northern Ireland has just received. So I think these claims about unfairness are not founded. But let's also keep the money in context. It's £1 billion over around about 3 years on average. It varies
2 years.
a bit.
It's actually 2 years.
It varies by programme. Some are 2 years, some are 4 years. So let's just say 3 on average. That's £300 million a year. That is 2.5 thousandth. That's 0.04% of government spending. So let's just also keep these numbers in proportion.
Right, so austerity has gone out of the window. I mean, we have been told. Well, we have been told for years by coalition and successive Tory governments that actually the country can't afford excessive spending, and yet, in order to buy votes, to use the words of Carwyn Jones again, you have been able to find £1 billion, as you say, for 2 years.
Well, for 3 years. And let's put it again in context. We're finding an extra £8 billion for the NHS, an extra £4 billion for education announced in the manifesto. So you've got to keep the number in proportion. It is 0.04% of all expenditure. So I don't think you can point to this expenditure, which is proportionately not enormous, and claim that that is the end of austerity. I don't think it is. We are still a government of financial responsibility.
Right. Well, in other words, then austerity was a political choice, wasn't it? It wasn't a necessity because we can afford these things.
Well, as I say, it measured against the scale of government spending, this is a relatively small sum of money.
But what I'm saying is your claims for austerity being necessary was a political ideology. No. It wasn't actually an economic necessity.
Well, it was, because when we came in 7 years ago, the deficit was 11% of GDP. It's now down to 2.6. If we hadn't have made that phenomenal progress, we'd be paying 2 or 3% on our national debt interest, like Spain or Portugal or Italy. And instead of our interest costing us £46 billion a year, it would be costing us somewhere between £100 and £150 billion a year. So it was an absolute necessity, and we're certainly going to finish the job.
Do you see this £1 billion as a down payment for, all right, you said 3 years, I said 2 years, but Nicholas Macpherson said that's how it will turn out to be. The DUP will come back for more.
Well, that is speculation. This deal, which I've got in front of me, lasts for the
duration... He's a former permanent secretary. He should know.
Well, I mean, it is, nonetheless, it is still speculation. This deal lasts for the lifetime of the Parliament until 2022. The deal is extremely clear. It's extremely transparent.
It'll be reviewed after 2 years, said Arlene Foster.
And unlike the correspondence between the DUP and Labour in 2010 and 2015, this is all public. It's in the open. It's fully transparent, which is exactly how it should be.
Right. Why was it necessary to do this deal at all when we know that the DUP were going to support a Conservative government on key votes like the Queen's Speech and the budget, because the result could have been Jeremy Corbyn becoming Prime Minister?
Well, clearly the election result was disappointing from a Conservative perspective, but what matters overridingly now is the national interest. We are clearly entering a time of uncertainty, particularly with the Brexit negotiations, and if we're going to navigate those successfully, as I hope and expect we will, we need to do that against a backdrop of parliamentary stability.
Right.
Clearly, we were a couple of seats short of an overall majority. By my calculation, about 3 seats short when you take out Sinn Féin and the Speakers. So this extra 10 votes on key issues gives the country that stability that it needs at a time of uncertainty.
I take that point, but they would have voted for you anyway.
Well, look, I think given that our critical national interest is at stake, that is not the sort of gamble or assumption I think anyone can responsibly make.
Really? Are you saying that they would have voted down a Conservative government and would have allowed the prospect, rightly or wrongly, of another election and Jeremy Corbyn, whom they do not support in any way, becoming Prime Minister?
Well, neither you nor I know, because how the DUP choose to vote in 6 months, a year, 2 years is up to them, not up to you or me. And given it is so important we have stability at this time of negotiation, I think the government were quite right to take absolutely no risks, which is what they've done. It's the responsible thing to do.
Right, so you sort of imply there that you could see the DUP reconciling their differences, particularly over Irish nationalism, with Jeremy Corbyn.
Well, it's all speculation, and I think the point, when you're at a situation of some uncertainty, you can't take any risk, you can't speculate, you can't make assumptions, you go for certainty in the national interest, and that is what the government has done.
Except you've had such widespread criticism. I mean, Francis O'Grady, do you welcome this extra funding going to health and education in Northern Ireland. Surely that's a good thing.
Look, of course, Northern Ireland needs more investment in its schools and hospitals, and indeed in getting its industries up and running too. But so does Scotland, so does Wales, so does England. And I think there is going to be a real sense of unfairness here, that you can't just find the convenient money tree when it's politically expedient to do so.
Well,
those cuts are hurting everybody across the nation. And I would say it's in the national interest to stop those cuts and think again, because you heard it on the doorsteps. People have had it up to here, and they want their schools and hospitals and new industries, critically for growth, to be invested into.
Well, of course, we do want the NHS funded properly, and schools. That's why we put an extra £8 billion into the NHS, 4 into education. But Northern Ireland is rather unique. It's had this awful 30-year, 40-year history of the Troubles. Employment in Northern Ireland is about 5% lower than the rest of the UK. So they are a rather special case. And in terms of the sort of magic money tree that gets referred to, the commitments the Labour Party made during the recent campaign...
It was a Tory phrase.
Well, indeed. But the commitments the Labour Party made during the recent campaign, bribing the electorate with their own money, were about 100 times bigger. 100 times bigger than the money we're talking about for Northern Ireland. So we need to keep it in proportion.
Right. I mean, talking of Northern Ireland, as a region, it's long received the most generous funding in the UK, partly because of what Chris Philp said, some of the structural difficulties. Are you still happy that it is also very heavily reliant on the public sector? I think it's about a quarter of the workforce that is employed in the public sector, which is higher than any other part of the UK.
Unions in Northern Ireland have long argued for an intelligent industrial strategy, just as we're doing across the UK, that in the end we need to get good jobs and good industries to create the wealth on which public services depend. But there is this other worry. I mean, I personally feel uneasy about what the implications of this deal are in the long term for the Good Friday Agreement. I'm optimistic, as your reporter was, that the Assembly will get up and running again, but it does erode trust when deals of convenience are done.
What do you say to that? Because there has been, again, a lot of criticism about it threatening the Good Friday Agreement.
Well, I don't think it will. If you read the agreement signed yesterday on the screen behind you, the DUP have reaffirmed their commitment to the peace process and to reforming the local executive, and the Conservative government have reaffirmed their unshakable commitment to the Good Friday Agreement, the Belfast Agreement and everything else. And critically, the Northern Ireland Secretary, James Brokenshire, did not and will not participate in any of these discussions with the DUP that have been taking place over the last few weeks and may take place again in the future, to make sure that his impartiality is completely protected.
Chris Philp, thank you very much.